I'd just like to say how pleased I am that you've turned up with something that's very close to my heart. My father flew in the war, and my mother was at Ossington, as I've told you, putting Merlin engines back together. And I didn't have enough time really to talk to them before they both died. And really, looking back, I just wish I'd spoken to them a bit more, but they wouldn't talk about it, to be quite truthful.
No.
And it'll be a lovely memento of them and everything that generation did for us all. And that's why we're all here, really.
Yes, that's right.
So well done, and thank you very much for bringing it.
Thank you. Thank you.
My parents didn't fly, but we did supply the gin for all the RAF stations and army stations in Lincolnshire, and I think they've made a small fortune out of it too. My father owned the Seeger's Gin place in London, which he then sold to me. But that's why my third name is S, and stands for Seeger's Gin. Yeah. If I'd known and it was going to be as cold as that, I'd have seen I could have brought a bottle with me.
Yeah, good idea.
No, it's a great pleasure, really.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
To be here, and as we are involved with the showground, we shall see this is kept in the finest of order.
Absolutely.
Correct.
Because I think it's great as you come in. I mean, it's a very, very active site, and I think it's wonderful the way it's been fenced off in a rural way. And I think it's great. And I had to say to the security man, I'll come up here, I said, where is this thing? I was expecting a big statue or something. Anyway, we're delighted.
You always had high expectations, Charles. But no, I the other way around. I grew up on a farm watching the bombers come back, sat on my mother's knee, and she counted them out and she counted them back. That was at Sarston. I lived in East Oak, the farm, on the flight pattern.
Yeah.
And I can remember my mother knew exactly how many went out and how many came back. So it's very dear to our hearts. And our fathers and forebears have got the society going here.
Yeah.
We've carried it on, and we hope it carries on ad infinitum.
Absolutely great.
Very, very pleased to see you, so well done.
Thank you.
Yes.
So,
well, just really, I'm not quite old enough to remember the flying out and flying back, but just really to say on behalf of the residents of the parish of Winthorpe and Langford, thank you very much. It's great to see a recognition of something that's really, really important in history, and it'll be here for eternity, hopefully. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, well done.
Well, thank you all very much for coming. My name's Kenneth Bannerman. I'm the founder of the Airfields of Britain Conservation Trust, which, if you haven't heard of us before, we are essentially the world's first national airfield charity. So we're really pleased and honoured to be here to help unveil this memorial today to Winthorpe Airfield. Now, just to give you a very quick potted history of the airfield and why this all matters. Winthorpe first opened in September 1940 and it served initially as a satellite to Swinderby in Lincolnshire, where we unveiled another of our memorials 3 years ago. Bombers, ferry battles initially, but then mainly Vickers Wellingtons were based here partly for dispersal reasons. And no sooner had Winthorpe opened than it actually was hit by very big parachute mine that landed in the airfield in mid-November 1940. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but it was the most almighty explosion. So bombers were based here into 1942, and then for a short while Winthorpe was also the satellite for Ossington Airfield, where we unveiled another of our memorials only yesterday morning, very happily to very considerable effect. Much of 1942 was taken up with the construction of concrete runways, and then once they were completed by the autumn of 1942, the main phase of Winthorpe's World War II activity involved number 1661 Heavy Conversion Unit, or HCU, which was used for bomber advanced flying training. Aircraft types constantly changed here, so at the start there was a mixture of types, including notably the Avro Manchester, the predecessor of the Avro Lancaster. That was the aircraft that had the turbo engines, but otherwise was a very good design, and in a 4-engine version became the Lancaster. Then, because Lancasters were eventually needed for frontline use, short Stirlings were brought in towards the end of 1943, and they remained here pretty much on their own in the main until the end of 1944, when Lancasters came back. There were also Halifaxes here for a short while too. Very busy here at that time, and having seen an awful lot of the records, for example, in the summer come early autumn of 1943, this was a good airfield, but just because heavy bombers were using it, the runways were taking a bit of wear and tear. So they had to refurbish the runways, and then also there was some temporary flying as well, just to keep the flying training schedules going at Balderton, where we unveiled another of our memorials 3 years ago. So eventually the HCU closed at the end of World War II, just after fighting had ended in the Far East. And after that, Winthorpe still remained part of the RAF, but it was used for example, transport trainer use, either as a satellite or as a parachute dropping zone. There was also some maintenance command use, notably by one maintenance unit in 1953 that was actually headquartered here. But the main unit in the 1950s that is still remembered was the Central Servicing Development Establishment, or CSDE. So this was really a ground RAF unit. They had aircraft here, but this was a very vital unit just in its own, because it coordinated and made more consistent all forms of aircraft servicing through procedures for ground crews to service aircraft. That lasted at Winthorpe between 1953 and the start of 1958, when the unit, which had come from famous Cambridgeshire airfield Wittering, still part of the RAF, then moved to Swanton Morley in Norfolk, which ABCT will be involved in with hopefully very soon. After that, this has always been a bit of the anomaly with Winthorpe in terms of its history. Through research we've done, the airfield is then confirmed to have closed in the summer of 1958. That's when it closed. There was also a couple of years before that, it was allocated to the United States Air Force, and they had a tiny involvement there. It was to do with a hospital, but it wasn't really primarily used, but it was still active, and then the Americans handed it back to the RAF. After that, as you'll no doubt remember, once a lot of the land here was de-requisitioned, however, the RAF still retained a presence well into the 1960s to do with housing. And this was due with the RAF Murray quarters at Coddington.
So that maintained the grass up there in those married quarters.
So that carried on well into the 1960s. Now, as you'll see in the memorial, we acknowledged the 1958 date. Too complicated to explain, but just that's when the airfield primarily closed. So the Winthorpe by this time, it was self-accounting for a while, but it was always a very faithful satellite airfield to Swinderby, Syerston, and you know, to a lesser degree, one or two other airfields like Ossington, for example. But you know, this place played a tremendous part, not just in the winning of World War II, but just in maintaining national security. Now, moving on from there, the showground was acquired at the start of 1962, although this is perhaps not all that remembered, certainly from the research we've done. There were actually agricultural shows here going back to the spring of 1949. So you can see that in all the research we've done, in all the papers. But this is a fantastic example of not just the tremendous history of this place and all the achievement and courage and dedication involved, but also, this is another part of what ABCT tries to indicate, the phenomenal social impact of Britain's airfields, whether active or disused. And they are being belatedly recognised, better late than never, as Britain's greatest ever physical assets. So we can just simply respectfully say to everybody, you know, just please do all you possibly can to help save, protect, honour and respect all of our airfields, whether active or disused. And I should say just as well, just before we unveil the memorial, I've been at Winthorpe quite a few times over the decades. First time I was here was certainly early to mid 1980s. So for example, you know, the gliding club was still here at the time. That eventually left in 2006, moved to Darrelton. But for example, I can remember using the old camera, the non-digital one. I remember getting permission, for example, to photograph the control tower. So that's now gone, and the main hangars, the three main hangars have gone too. But it goes without saying that today, with what remains of the airfield, this is still enormously relevant on so many levels, just historically and in terms of social impact. So that's why, you know, this is part of what ABCT does. We try and help save airfields, apart from anything else. We operate in a very wide front. Yeah. So, and again, thank you all very much for attending. And you know, we wish you well with the memorial, and we're very pleased to provide this for you. And therefore, it's with great pleasure we're now able to unveil what is now ABCT's 192nd memorial, and we've got hundreds more lined up, by the way. In this case, to yet another of our absolutely priceless assets in this country, one and only Winthorpe Airfield. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done, sir. So do we want to go around?
No, just you can just lift it there, however you'd like to do it.
Oh, that's lovely.
So, thanks, thank you. I hope that's okay for you.